I call the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And once there was a Labor Party which stood for the true believers. Once upon a time. Once there was a party of the workers, of those who were not doing so well, Deputy Speaker, and those who wanted to get ahead. Once there was a party where small business wasn't penalised for growing, nor the politics of envy in play, because to them politics is more important than people. There was a party which wanted more Australians in work, Deputy Speaker, which worked with the parliament to make that possible, to make possible the dreams of those who seek to make our nation fairer. And there was a party which was up to the job Australians deserve of their parliaments. But unfortunately, Deputy Speaker, those days are gone, and this matter of public importance debate proves it. That the member for McMahon would lecture this government on incompetence or competence or either is absolutely laughable. Absolutely laughable. This is the Shadow Treasurer from the one-time government of Grocery Watch, the incompetent government of Fuel Watch. He was the immigration minister who oversaw huge numbers of boat arrivals, of chaos at the heart of government, and who sat behind the Treasurer's desk for a few sorry weeks, albeit he never delivered a budget. The Shadow Treasurer has written a book, he agrees, on Labor's money men, but as Labor's money men he's never had to write a budget. He's never had to make spending add up nor fund the promises of those opposite. Never had to do it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And that's why, and he agrees with me, so that's good. That's good. Listen up. You might agree with what I have to say. That's why he stands opposite to the fair and reasonable spending in this budget. Now we'll see if he agrees with me, Deputy Speaker. Just a little more than 2 weeks ago, on the 9th of May, this government delivered a budget for all Australians. All Australians. It was an action budget, not like the budgets written by the member for Rankin opposite for the member for Lilly. Not like those, Mr. Speaker. Oh no, Australians wanted action on schools, so we took it. Australians wanted action on the National Disability Insurance Scheme, so we funded it. Australians wanted to see the inland rail between Brisbane and Melbourne built, so we're building it. And Australians in small business wanted tax cuts, so we delivered it. It was a budget of security, of opportunity and of fairness for communities large and small, in the inland and on the coast, and no matter, Deputy Speaker, where people live. It's a budget, as with all of our budgets, Deputy Speaker, which backs small business and puts them in the driver's seat to grow our economy. It backs those who create jobs. It backs those who build our nation, and it is there for those who need the support the most, the vulnerable. It was a fair budget, but as we look to the Labor Party to get on board with some of our budget measures which secure better days for all Australians, which make permanent the policies which should make this parliament proud, those opposite, Deputy Speaker, well, they just play politics. They are happy to sell Australians down the river, happy to see small business suffer, happy to play politics, rather than do the job they are elected to do, Deputy Speaker. This year's budget had our commitment to fully fund the NDIS because it's the fair and proper and right and correct thing to do. But while this government delivers the full funding of a bipartisan testament to that which is possible when this parliament works together, Deputy Speaker, those opposite again seek to play petty politics, and none more so petty than the member for McMahon opposite. Almost everyone agrees the 0.5% increase which funds the NDIS is a fair way to ensure the scheme, of which every member in this place and every Australian should be rightly proud, is a reality for the Australians who need it the most. We will only collect the money when the bills come in because we owe it to the Australians who need it to link this levy from 1 July 2019 to the NDIS Savings Fund. When this idea was first introduced and the Every Australian Counts campaign was asking federal MPs to get their pledge for their support, I was the first from New South Wales to sign up, and I was delighted to do so. Delighted. Because for me, as it was for the coalition at the time, this was not a question of politics or pettiness. It was sensible, it was fair, and it had our full support, and it also had the support of Kurrajong Waratah in the Wagga Wagga community and the wider Riverina. So now we are asking every Australian who has a reasonable capacity to contribute to do so through a levy in which fairly represents their ability. As the Minister for Social Services has said, our plans are asking those who can to contribute, and that's only fair. He said, the member for Pearce said, a single person with an income of $28,000 to fill the funding gap, they would be expected to pay $75 a year in 2019-20. A person on an income of $200,000 would be required to pay an extra $1,000. So a person with 7 times more income would pay 13 times more to fill the gap. That is a fair way to fund this scheme. It's something which even those opposite in shadow cabinet know is a fair way to fund the scheme, a fair way to fund the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Deep within the heart of those opposite is the party of the possible, of that which I outlined at the start of this MPI, but it's not in the heart of the member for McMahon or the opposition leader. We've read reports of how the opposition leader chose politics over people. We've read about those opposite who wanted to fill the funding gap, those opposite left, but were thwarted by the opposition leader's political games. Deputy Speaker, even Dr Craig Emerson, a former Labor minister and certainly a luminary for those on the other side, has called out the opposition leader's hypocrisy. He said Labor should support the full Medicare levy rise. In doing so, it would lock in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, a signature Labor reform for which Bill Shorten can take much credit from his time as the Rudd government's Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities and Children's Services. But gone are the days, Deputy Speaker, of the opposition leader taking credit. Now it's just about him and it's just about politics. Dr Emerson knows the story of rank hypocrisy from those opposite, Deputy Speaker. He knows it doesn't stop at the NDIS. His op-ed continued. Really, I would urge members opposite to in fact read it. Labor can again demonstrate its credentials as a party of social reform and economic credibility. It should support the full increase in the Medicare levy, unconditionally back the bank levy and pass the school funding legislation. That's what Dr Emerson said, former minister, former Labor luminary. Because our school funding model implements what David Gonski was calling for. We know education is the great enabler. Through delivering a needs-based funding model for schools with investment increasing year on year over the next decade, we are skilling our kids with the tools they need for the future from today for tomorrow. It's $18.6 billion over the next decade to make sure schools funding is needs-based, equitable and targeted. And once again, those opposite, unfortunately, Deputy Speaker, all they're doing is playing politics. There are 128 schools in the Riverina and Central West electorate that I represent, the large rural electorate, and every single one of them, each and every one of them, Deputy Speaker, is going to see a very real increase in funding. Every single one of them. But perhaps the greatest hypocrisy of those opposite is the speed with which they have sold out small business. There was a time when the Leader of the Opposition was part of a party which wanted to create jobs. Just over 3 years ago, he stood at this at the dispatch box there and said, I invite you to work with me on a fair and fiscally responsible plan to reduce the tax rate for Australian business from 30% to 25%, not a 1.5% cut, a 5% cut. And he went on further. Small business represents aspiration. It represents people who want to break away from a salaried job. Yet today he sells small business down the river. His Labor Party voted against our tax cuts and made clear that those opposite do not understand small business and they will raise its taxes in government. That's what they'll do. If ever they get back here, if ever they get back on this side, they will raise taxes. And the member for Rankin's smiling. He's got that smile about him. Oh yes, he can see. That's who will hit small business. That's who we'll work on. That's who will jack up their taxes. We'll take away the instant asset write-off. That's what he'll do, Mr Speaker, if ever he gets a position of power in which he can do that. Given multiple opportunities at the National Press Club last week, the Shadow Treasurer could have confirmed whether Labor would keep the Coalition's tax cuts for small business. He could have. But instead the Shadow Treasurer dodged and ducked and weaved and failed to answer the questions. Because the answer is simple. We back small business. Our budget backs small business. It funds the NDIS. It funds needs-based school funding. It's fair. It delivers a budget for all Australians and for equity. And while we are the ones who will deliver the fairness, the opportunity and security Australia needs, those opposite will just backflip again. And I can't understand, Mr Speaker, I cannot understand, Deputy Speaker, why Labor doesn't want to back the 27.5%. It's the lowest it's been for many, many decades. Many decades, Mr Speaker. All those opposite want to do is ramp taxes back up. They don't see that a small business, the definition of one should be a $10 million turnover. They confuse turnover with profit, Deputy Speaker. They don't understand the difference. They don't understand that many thousands more small businesses will now have that asset, that accessibility to the instant asset write-off, so they can buy the capital equipment that they need in their small business to be able to create more efficiency, create more productivity and create more jobs.